Such a Pollyanna. I'm so naive. Welcome back to Senate Economic Development. We are going to begin a conversation about sort of our top three priority areas around which I see us developing committee bills. And many of us have drafted stuff that hasn't yet been introduced for a variety of reasons. The Leg Council is been overwhelmed, I think, by things that all the great ideas that legislators have given them. But I'd love to begin to talk about. We've heard a lot in the last 5 minutes, and some of it's so stimulating and interesting. Some of it is actionable, some of it isn't, or maybe not immediately. I also balancing the reality of our having to get our bills out by March 14th, and that is coming up very fast. We can get a lot done. I have confidence that we can get a huge amount done, but we have a new committee. We're getting up to speed. We're listening to a lot of the updates on all the key areas that are our jurisdiction. I feel good that we now have at least a foundation for this conversation, and we'll begin it today. And then we're going to continue because we only have half an hour right now. But what I'd really like to have us discuss, and we may not even get through all three areas, but if we begin to talk about what are some of our housing priorities in our jurisdiction, and what are our economic development priorities that we've heard, what are some of the actionable things that we can do this year in housing, labor, and economic development. I think those are the three committee bills I would love to see us tackle. And so all the Leg Council are poised to work and begin to put things into bills that we can begin to look at as committee bills in the next week. So I've been meeting with my counter chairs in the House to look at dividing up things. So perhaps a good place to start, and I'm sorry Keisha isn't here, but gotta start, and I can fill her in because we are in close communication on housing. But for me, the things that we in this committee can begin to address in housing are infrastructure pieces, project-based TIFs, the SPARK, from the governor's proposal. We could take that in. We're going to hear next week. We're going to have 2 economic development days, Wednesday and Thursday. Joan and Jessica are going to come in and really walk through that proposal and the brownfield. So to me, those are 2 key pieces of both economic development, enabling that in our downtowns and village centers, but also for housing in our more rural, smaller centers and towns. So that brownfield, VHIP and ADUs, which I think would love to incorporate the governor's proposals in that, and for us to look at and spend more time deciding what we want to do on those, making them permanent, and to me adding more money. And I have a tax proposal on how to support people who become ADU developers. The landlord tenant recommendations, project-based assessments are some good new ideas. Homelessness, what are we able to do actually right now in this crisis of homelessness? That's a jurisdictional combination between human services and us. Creative, cost-effective construction. We're going to hear a great presentation next week from Chad and Maura on offsite construction. What little bit can we do to move that along and support that work? It's your neck of the woods. Fairhaven is one of the sites, and we're going to hear more about that. Migrant farmer housing, supportive housing for the disabled, which you heard Frank talk about, high need in smaller settings, incentives to encourage home sellers to sell to full-time buyers, and incentives to encourage second homeowners to rent unused or develop unused properties that they have, or house, buildings that we could turn into full-time residential stuff, and then construction workforce. Of those, I think the House, just to kind of finish my thought about how the House, I think, is very interested in starting the SPARK piece, because they have a whole idea that is quite different, that would reform TIFs, update them, and make them less of a problem, I think, for us, for the entire legislature to deal with, but also honoring the need that we need to invest in infrastructure for us to accomplish our housing goals. So and we haven't finalized these at all. And they're going to start the landlord tenant discussion because they have the chair of that task force in their committees. And so they're going to begin those big pieces. They're going to begin those. And I thought we could begin the brownfield discussion and the brownfield proposal in the governor's office, in the governor's bill, and expand on that, and the VHIP and ADUs. So that is just what has been on the housing piece. And do you have additional ideas for housing? Appeals, the permit appeals are all one of our top priorities. I think the chair, I think a lot of us are feeling like we have to honor the LURB work that they're launching on. I would like very much to add to have the report due sooner, so that we can all take it on board and be ready to do action on the appeals in January. So the one thing I would do to the LURB, the piece we put in action in Act 181 last year, is to suggest that we actually have them finish that work sooner rather than later, so that we can act on appeals pretty pronto next session. I am not so, and some of that may be on, and if it's municipal or natural resources. So we'll see. Anyway, those are the thoughts I have for our housing and our, what we might be able to add. But I'd love all of your ideas to add to the housing, because Cam is ready to start putting together something for us to begin to take action on. So actionable things for this year that we can actually accomplish within our jurisdiction.
One of the issues is the amount of time that we have with the Act 250 exemptions that we did over last year. There was a thing that we wanted to extend for what 28 or we thought, well, the previous 27 and 28 or 29.
27, yeah.
We cut time short, and I'd like to see that lengthened again.
That is all going to be in SNRE.
It should be.
Yeah. So this year we are really, the Pro Tem has made it very clear to me that we are honoring the jurisdictional lines. One of the challenges we faced, as you know, in the last 2 years was I don't want us battling between our committees. So we're really going to try as much as possible to stay in our lane. And so I think we might benefit from a joint session clarifying that, or at least discussing it. That might be, because we all had interest in those issues. There's no question. They aren't things we're care a lot about. So that might be a good conversation for a joint session.
Jurisdictional issues, as to whether or not there's anything we can or should do in the short run to speed up the process, building and approvals. How much time we have or plan to spend, we're looking at the jurisdictional issues associated with home building as to what can be done to either combine, eliminate, avoid duplication, those kinds of things that certainly have been addressed in the 150 studies we've done so far. After we do something, if we don't do something permanently, do something on an interim basis, move this process along, because time isn't this factor that I find is a little perplexing of all the stuff that we face here.
I agree. High on my list is aligning permitting and avoiding duplicative stuff. I agree. David, you got some?
I do have one idea specific to housing.
Yeah.
My sense, and again, I don't have the experience you guys have with these issues. I think that I call it VHIP Plus, which is essentially doing exactly what VHIP does without the requirement to have some of the units be used for low income. That it's a renovation rehabilitation incentive to owners to bring units back online at a fraction of the cost of new construction. And I'm not sure why we're not approaching that.
Because some of the dollars, because public dollars tend to be used for public goods, and one of the public goods, and our public good, I would argue now, is to house everybody.
Right. So either it is or it isn't a crisis. And if it's a crisis, we need to pull a different lever.
So,
or an additional lever. It's one more tool.
How many people who might take advantage of something who might want to rehabilitate a property are turned off by the restrictions and strings attached.
And they
They're
have the,
Hard at all.
won't do it. And those are also the people, in some cases have at least some of the money to do it.
That's correct.
right, so we'll explore that next week with Sean Gilpin, who's coming in.
I want to add to that. So why I thought of and raised the commercial property assessed clean energy
Yeah.
financing mechanism is I think that's like circling what you're after. Because if you think about a developer wanting to build a large multi-story housing complex in a downtown center area or a commercial complex, reinvesting it, these PACE financing things, which work for commercial properties, are a way to incentivize and align the repayment of solar panels or a lot of the energy efficiency things that we do want that do have financial returns, more energy efficiency and so on, with those that buy the property from them later on. So in a way, it honors the current market mechanisms while aligning with some of our policy objectives. So I hear you on BHIPs or without the affordable housing strings attached. I'm just wondering if the seat pace concept that is proving very successful in other states. In New
Yeah.
Hampshire just adopted one that Chris Delia is telling me about that has these two characteristics that he thinks makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering if that might fit some of that piece there, if we had some testimony on it. And I have submitted some requests for language.
Yeah, no, I was excited that you did that. That was great.
If the committee so desires, I'd be happy to try to find some testimony from individuals that can speak to what this is. But maybe I'll do that over the weekend. I'll
No.
send some emails CCing you and see if that's.
And I sent your idea to Mark Mahaly, who is also, because he has a lot of land use development work in California where they do use assessments, project-based assessment work. And I would love to figure out how we can align that with what he's thinking, because he's thinking very much, let's think differently about this.
This won't help the small time house flipper. That is just regular pace and that's got tons of problems with it, but we could certainly explore pace. I just already know where the pitfalls are going to be. Municipalities are going to, yeah. But the commercial cases.
So BHIP plot, great idea. Sean will be in next week. And if you felt like emailing him and saying you'd like to discuss that, I will give you his
Which,
email.
yep,
With Sean Gilpin, I'll do that. What's your second?
Evaluating the use of eminent domain to recapture dormant homes.
Or vacant, blighted,
That's right, sell them at market or, repay market price. Municipality owns them, they put them back on the market, they recoup their costs, they're back into the redevelopment, refurbishment market, and you get house back.
or
And
abandoned, basically abandoned properties, because that is a great, yes, you mentioned that in your list of things earlier, and I forgot to put it on this.
I had my intern study it. We don't have we really don't have experience in Vermont with eminent domain in that regard.
Yeah, we have it for transportation big time.
That's my recollection from city council days. I was told you could only use eminent domain for transportation in projects like. It's just,
That's just the press.
I think let's explore it. I think it's an interesting idea. We have tried to incent the owners who are active owners of those properties through VHIP
Right.
to do something about it.
Right.
And it would be interesting for us to explore. Anyway, great idea. I think that's a terrific idea to explore. And you have another one, I think. Yes, for housing or other? Okay.
No. for
Okay,
housing.
so Tom, you have any additional thoughts for
Sure.
housing?
I got a list of small things that I think are in Senator Ron Hinsdale's bill. They're from a developer, a well-known developer, Evan Langfeld from O'Brien Brothers. So these are just little punch card things and I'll forward them on. They're having to do with reforming some of the previous acts, like the home bill, the home bill.
Yeah.
Really small tweaks. I think they're in Keisha's bill, with Senator Ron Hinsdale's bill, but we need to walk through it. One broader topic that I'd love to hear thoughts from my colleagues in more rural communities. I represent Chittenden County. Current use. So I want to understand this better, and I just keep hearing that current use is currently shielding some land from development pressures or incentives while also reducing our tax rolls. And I think that intersects housing. So I'd love to better understand why we have 2.7 million acres in current use right now. We used to only have 200,000, and what those impacts are on a macro scale, and whether or not that might be where new industrial parks or housing developments might be if the current use program had a little more structure over who could enroll in it and what the obligations they had to achieve.
So as you know, current use began at the land, a working lands, how to protect and keep land as it is currently used. And that was designed to enable the active farm and agricultural use and forest. Largest enrollee is forest. Our forest product industry is one of our biggest industries, as you know. So it is. I think we have a new director of the current use program. We could definitely, that is a big, very tackle.
Yeah.
It's a fun.
I hear.
I
But that
chaired
may
the,
not be
I
tax,
chaired the only current use task force we've had because it's like opening Pandora's box.
but it is, and as I say, it may not be something that you can realistically do in.
No,
the
it's
first
not this
biennium.
year.
This is the
Yeah, yeah.
next part.
Well, like,
But-
it's something
It's
to
important.
begin to explore though. I would love to put a pin in that and look
So-
at that maybe after crossover.
It would be helpful, this session.
Yeah.
To school us up, help us out.
Yeah.
Understand the concept.
Yeah.
Let us noodle it and then come back.
Yeah, I
Yes.
agree.
And I'd be happy to pull out our 2007, last time we had a big current use task force, which I chaired. It is, I will be happy to dig that out and have, and give it to you because you need to see it. And it would be a great way for us after crossover to meet the new director of, who resides in PVNR, the Property Value Review, Jill Remick's team over at PAX. So we have a new director there, and that would be a great way to meet him or her.
For those that
I'm
won't
embarrassed, I don't know.
follow up on this, I want to admit, I don't understand and know what current use is, so I need to
Oh,
upskill
I
myself
see.
as well. I just hear these conversations.
I agree with you. I finally researched it over the last weekend. I was surprised to find what I found, but
No,
I don't know enough.
it's also our, I will say this, it is our greatest conservation program. So it is, that is in many ways why it is sort of sacred to many of us, but always needs to be updated.
Well, so is Act 250. But Act 250
Mm.
introduced with some legislation, there's always some negative consequences. We need to see
Yeah.
if there's a negative consequence. That's all.
I-
We don't know enough to know.
So that's a big pin. I think what we will do next week is, I'll pull the housing pieces together from Keisha's, because she and I, we talked for a long time last time, but we didn't get to the housing. So she and I will touch base, because I know she's pulled together, as former chair, she took a lot of the ideas that have been coming in and has sort of put them into an omnibus bill that she is looking at. So let's pull those ideas together. I'll circulate that early next week and we'll begin to then develop that because we're going to need to move on that. And may I shift to economic development? And maybe we should have our economic development next Friday discussion after we hear from all these people, but
The question is, as you take the broad categories, are bills that we have on the wall right now included in any of those categories, or you doing?
there's one bill at the moment included in this, and we can either act on it, and that's a choice we can make as a committee. We can either keep it separate or we can act on it and incorporate it into a bigger committee bill. So we can make that decision. Well, let's pivot to labor instead. Let's just chat. Where'd my thoughts?
I do like Randy's idea though, that we have a conversation about economic development after we hear the economic development deep dive.
Well, that's one idea, but I'm happy to just run through some of my thoughts that to get the conversation right. Labor, we have proposal 3, which we're going to be hearing about next Tuesday, which is the constitutional proposal that we passed last year. It has to be passed again this biennium by a majority vote in both the House and the Senate for it to go to the voters in November of 20.
Can you remind us of the general talk for those that?
Right, to organize.
Oh, right to organize.
We can-
Right, sorry. So we're hearing from them. next.
Underlying, by the way, that in minds, I think, a lot of farmers, does that create, in effect, the right to organize, the right to strive, the right to do all kinds of things? And what are the implications of that, given what current law is?
Right. I don't think so if it's not included in current law. We have S6 on our wall, we have S6, F37, and, you know, we have some of the labor bills we've begun to discuss. S37 was the unemployment insurance support for school support staff. We began to hear about that the other day. We have Patient's omnibus labor bill, which we heard pieces of, but which we'll walk through with Sophie. I have a proposal to establish the livable wages, the minimum wage for Vermont as calculated by the basics needs budget. That's drafted and can either be introduced as a separate bill or can be looked at in light of all this. And there are some other labor pieces. I know that AFT has a proposal. Again, it's not drafted, but they have come to us again with a proposal to allow college and university staff to strike, which is a big deal because at the moment we don't allow certain public sector employees and they are considered that at the yes. So I mean that is, and we may or may not be able to take that up this year in the short time we have.
So two things. One, I'm being asked to introduce that in the Senate. I'm trying to understand the backstory before I put my name on it. I generally support that notion, but I don't know all of the history. So that's what it's on my to-do list.
Yeah, okay. So that would to me mean let's discuss it as a committee thing because we've both been asked to introduce it. So which is a frustration I have. For those of you listening, please just ask one of us to introduce things rather than scattershot.
It was a hallway conversation, nothing for.
Yeah. Often the case.
The other thing,
Yeah, that's
just so that you don't feel blindsided, I do have reservations about S37. And so before I'd be willing to support something like this, I want to walk us through the bill, scrutinize the language and get more testimony on it. Because there are some concerns I have. And that's just me.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I hear you. And we began that. And that's just what I wanted to get started because we hadn't really talked about any labor issues. And so we'll begin. We began with that work yesterday and we will continue that. Are there any other labor issues you have? Yeah.
So I know that there's a bill coming through for Office of New Americans. I'm wondering if it's hit or if it's been assigned already to a different committee.
It will go to GovOps. If we created
You
a law.
should see it at some point.
I think Martine, I don't know where it is. But it would probably go to GovOps, is my guess.
You don't think we should touch it here?
We could certainly ask for it if you like.
I think it would be appropriate.
It-
We're not, so my point,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure Office of New Americans is really is the real response. But the base truth is all the states are feeding from the same trough. And there's a limited amount of supply going to the trough. So how do we affect that
You mean in migration?
in migration?
Yeah. And we're assigned who comes here of our refugee population and our New Americans.
That's just a draw.
But it's a very important
I
addition
get
to
that.
our
If we're
work.
talking hundreds, that's hundreds. I'm talking tens of thousands.
Well, yes, and sadly, I think that for us to honor that way that we need of workforce is the federal
I
immigration.
agree. But the Office of New Americans is a concept I think we just ought to take some testing.
Yeah, I think that's great. Any other labor issues?
Well, in terms of labor issues, like, major thing, one of the major things that concerns me is how much do these things cost if we're currently being paid for them. S37 is the classic example, right?
Yeah, and I need to ask, because one of the follow-ups was asking JFO to do, so after we could walk through, we can decide if we want to ask JFO to do a physical notice. Because you're absolutely right. Thank you very much. Okay. You ready to hit the high level on some of the economic development things? Okay, here are my high level. And remember, this is This is just to get our Ledge Council gears going. And we're gonna hear about these next, well, I don't know when we're gonna hear about downtown tax credits, but still. Downtown tax credits, in the governor's proposal. Designations, we talked about, expanded trade offices. We're gonna hear from Tim Tierney next week. We've had a very successful trade office established in Quebec. And we're looking at, again, avenues to sell our goods abroad. We're looking at, with a number of other states, establishing one in the Pacific somewhere in Asia. BIPOC community bid, we're going to get an update on that next week. Wages, which I think we've just decided are the three of us, you, Rick, and I, which that's labor, marketing, micro business community. Follow up on our small business conversation and how we can continue to roll out more supports for our small businesses and entrepreneurs. And that's looking at access to capital. It's looking at resources that we can continue to provide.
What I'm looking at, frankly,
Yeah.
many of the things that you mentioned is accountability and return on investment.
I know you are.
How do we know that we're giving money to these things, that we're actually getting something that good Warren said? Yes, some of the things may be subjective and feel good that we get back, but I would like to see some economic objectives.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the excitements that we hear on some of this. And then access to capital. And we have this state small business credit initiative that has been divided. There's $59 million that's come into the state, half of it just to loans, half of it to equity. And so I want to get an update on where that's going, how that's being invested. And so we're going to hear from a whole host of capital investors and VITA. So a whole range. And I will show you this list and I can run through this list, but that is a piece of it. So what we've been doing, we've missed you because, and you and I need to coordinate on our housing stuff because we talked big time picture of what we have a very few weeks to get bills together. And I'm
very antsy to just put language on the table.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and we began with labor. So we took three big buckets, labor, economic development, and housing.
Yeah.
And so I would love to chat with you in the next, we talked about some of our housing hopes.
Okay.
Lots of Toms were aligned with you. And
I have language whenever we're ready to.
Yeah. And I have language too on some stuff. So I think we want to get that if as much as possible on the table and that we can start walking through next week.
When? So, okay. So we're scheduling a whole day to walk through language next week.
Question is, we need to figure out when we're going to start doing that. And yes, we have to start.
I know we have to do that. I feel like I don't want to
Right.
that here.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
It's just our time has been extremely tight.
One thing I made is that you know, fits into the language that you have drafted. Evan Langfeld from Ryan Brothers, this list of 8 and 9 things that he told me revisit the home bill. Is that part of what you
will you? I think a lot of them are naturally, and Evan Langfeld, as folks may know, has been at the center of the actual litigation of our language from the last 2 years. So the cleanup that I'm aiming for from that bill is in many ways re-emphasizing our intent in places where that was called into question. So yeah, we just have so much specific work to do that. I think we can then find witnesses who help tell that story. And so much of what we've been hearing from these witnesses is in some of these bills.
Right. And I know this is a source of discussion for you and me, but we have been asked by the pro tem really to stay in our lane on some of this. So some of this you may be wanting also to ask in SNRE and some of it here. So let's chat when we have more time to do that.
Right.
But
joint session we might do?
What?
You said we might do a joint session with them.
Well, I think that might be a wise idea just to clarify.
I mean, our lane is housing. I have nothing in my bills about tier 3. I have, but we are tier 1A and B.
Well, actually, that's a discussion that we have to have with the pro tem. Because and with Ellen and with Anne. So that is not clear.
I mean, those are economic development and housing zones. So
There one day is New Hampshire.
we can, I don't know if we have that discussion here or elsewhere, but if we're still having that discussion now and it's February, I am concerned.
No.
Because I'm not gonna relitigate that every 2 weeks, you know, like, we can send a bill to them, or I can go present my language in their committee, but whatever it is, we're not ignoring it because it's jurisdictionally complicated.
We're not ignoring it. I think you ought to be presenting it
Right.
wherever it should go.
But
Right.
to get to some form of agreement as to what we're gonna do overall sooner and not on the last day of the session.
I think I'm clear on the agreement, and I think that we just need to make sure we present it where it needs to be presented.
Exactly, but let's present it here first. And then I would anticipate as chair, you can have that conversation with others, or you can send me to have that conversation, but I don't want us to get bogged down in process at the expense of the economy and our housing crisis.
That is absolutely what my intention is, and what I have been working to make sure doesn't happen.
Okay,
So that is. But I will share with you the housing list we just talked about and see how it coordinates with what you, and I think we're being called to the floor. So time is short. I acknowledge that, and that's.
So time's always short around here. I mean, that's.
And yeah, that's why I have language.